bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.
Welcome into USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM alongside my co-host Marion Crowder. I'm Anna Witte. It was an exciting match day 5 in the Super League. It started with DC against Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale with a 2-0 win, their first ever win on the season. Goals from Addie McCain and Jasmine Hamid. And then it was Dallas and Lexington, and there were a lot of firsts in that match. Dallas had the first hat trick. They had the first brace with a 6-2 win over Lexington. Lexington is still a really young team, and their head coach, Michael Dickey, said a big part of the start of the season is just getting some of these young players acclimated to playing at the professional level. But things really clicked for Dallas. And in the middle of the show, we talked with the hat-trick goal scorer, Allie Thornton, a little bit about that match in her career. So stay tuned for that one. Then it was Spokane and Carolina at the end of the weekend. Carolina with a 2-0 win, their first win on the road in the Super League. Spokane had the majority of the possession. The opportunities really did flow from Carolina, just winning the ball higher up the field. So the one thing Spokane has to fix is that collective problem solving. Marion, the Tampa Bay Brooklyn game was the match where we learned arguably the most from both sides. It was a Brooklyn win, 1-0, a 23rd minute goal from Isabel Cox for Brooklyn. Tampa Bay looked incomplete. The details weren't there. It just didn't look normal. What did you learn about Brooklyn, though, and their ability to get on the road, play against a very experienced Tampa team, and get a big win?
Yeah, a lot to take from that match. I thought all in all, it was really good. And I actually can't wait for a rematch of those two teams because I think from a matchup perspective, there are some really interesting 1v1 situations to delve into. I thought Brooklyn showed tremendous self-awareness. We obviously didn't see Isabel Cox in the starting 11 last match. We saw her in the starting 11, and boy, did she have a huge impact in that Tampa Bay game. I think for Brooklyn, you learned that they can execute a game plan quite quickly. For Brooklyn, this is a team that is only in their second match, and they really showed that they can shapeshift a little bit. They can change tempo a little bit, and they can go on the road and get things done. So arguably, the question is, what do they look like at home, right? You can only assume that it's going to be a little bit better. I think you've got to give them all the credit. I mean, what a start. They had 4 points in their opening 2 matches. Like I said, both away from home. I think the point of progression for them was they were extremely patient defensively. I thought that they waited their times out right. They funneled into pockets of space very nicely. And then they relied, while their attack is still growing and while it's still maturing into some sophistication, I think that they did a really nice job of leaning into their impact players when they needed to, as we saw in that goal from Isabel Cox. The one thing that I'll say about Tampa Bay, I thought they looked really fatigued defensively. That's why I want to see the rematch of this. I do want to preface, though, I think that's to be expected. We said it on the broadcast multiple times. This is a new schedule. Everybody's trying to figure out what the week looks like. Everyone's trying to figure out how to manage travel, how to manage coming back from travel the next week. And around this kind of 4 to 7 game stretch, we might see teams look a bit fatigued as they start to adapt to this new schedule. And so I think that was the game for Tampa Bay. It just looked at times like it was a bit too shadow defensively. Not enough bite until a little bit too late into the match for me.
You make a really good point about Tampa Bay and their defensive structure, and it's almost surprising because they do have that experience across the back line. They've got Kristen Edmonds. They have Natalia Stade on the other side, who in the match against Lexington, really high flying, really contribute to the attack, but also knew their defensive responsibilities. That's what makes Brooklyn so exciting, right? Is their ability to really exploit the pieces that Tampa Bay has that are consistent. You add, Jordan Listro in the 6 for Tampa Bay. That's a really experienced line who knows how to manage a game, but we didn't see the full 90-minute performance by Tampa Bay. Their biggest bright spot was their attack, with Nacello and Giomana getting involved and having the chances, especially from the wide areas. But you got to credit Brooklyn. I mean, they really handled the waves of Tampa Bay in their 60% possession of this match. They did a good job of sticking to their game plan without a head coach. I mean, they have an interim head coach in Kristen Sample, who is going to be the goalkeeper coach when their coach comes in. So I think it's just a complete side from Brooklyn, who's still really young, and they're kind of playing with a little bit of naivety, right? Like it's almost like it's fun. Let's see what we can do with our young side.
Yeah, there's also some intelligence there, right? I thought one of the biggest kind of players that we didn't call her name too much, but had a really impactful game because of who you said, right? So Tampa Bay pulls Jordan Listro into that central midfield position, almost at times acting like a single pivot. We talked very similar to Carolina with Taylor Porter. Sometimes when you're a single pivot, it's a lot of ground to cover. Especially when you don't have the balance of the midfield completely ironed out yet. And I thought the right back Rosette for Brooklyn was outstanding. I thought she inverted when she should. I thought that she played a little bit of cat and mouse in more vertical position, trying to get some overloads in the wide area. And I thought that specific movement from her as an outside back really caused a lot of problems for Tampa Bay to sort out in the midfield. And because of that, it was like a domino effect, right? To Jordan, there were a lot of decisions that had to be made, a lot of ground that she had to cover. A lot of times she was getting pulled out of that central position without people dropping back for her. And
Right.
because of, one movement of a single player off the ball, all of that was happening. And I don't want to take away, like I said, I don't want to take any credit away from what the individual playmakers in the attack did for Brooklyn. We talked about Isabel Cox. We talked about a lot of their combination play. Their build up through the thirds that actually led to Isabel Cox's goal was absolutely outstanding. So don't get me wrong. They were tremendous on the ball, but I've got to give credit to the movement off the ball from their right back. It really did change the game in a lot of ways.
The single pivot in the midfield is something that we've noted in every single match, just how each team is trying to exploit the midfield and get synced together. So the big question really is right now, should teams be playing in a double pivot? Do you like the single pivot at this point in the season? Or is it more just a personnel varies game to game?
Personnel varies.
Yeah.
If you have intelligence, right, in your front line, which is one of my biggest takeaways from all of the matches, has been how much intelligence we are starting to see from individual players, right? We're starting to see a bit of a structure come together for these teams. Everybody's getting their identity. And within that structure, we're seeing the nuances of the intelligence from player A to player B to player C. I think that's coming to life very, very nicely. And because of that, when you play a single pivot, right, you are teasing the intelligence of the attackers a little bit. Do they have the discipline? Like let's say, for instance, I think of Spokane, and they like to get touchline wide with their wingers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would they have the discipline to come in and invert a little bit and try to occupy the single pivot elsewhere so that they can have the runs on the opposite side of the ball? So as an attacker, I personally love a single pivot because I do think that it offers, right? Are you going to go with what is comfortable for you and what you're used to? Are you going to have a little bit of a different look and a different uniqueness to your attack? Oftentimes we can see that number 9 start to play as a false 9 with the single pivot. And then the 2, if they're playing with 2 wingers, then they perhaps go a little bit more centrally. So there's so many things as an attacker that you can do to expose a single pivot. And so for that, I actually love it because I think it makes the game more interesting. I think it makes the attackers think a little bit more from a defensive standpoint. I do think it's a bit early in the season to play with as many single pivots as we've seen. That's a lot to ask in terms of the relationship between the midfielders, always ensuring that someone's tracking back, always ensuring you have a true box-to-box midfielder, right? That 8 position. I think that position is where we have not seen a lot of coming out, if that makes sense, right? I haven't seen a true box-to-box midfielder that will go and act as a second 10, but also come back and act as a second 6. And so as we start to progress and as teams, again, get more confident, get more freedom going forward, I'll be interested to see how that replicates with their recovery runs too.
The one player I could see doing that was DeMarco. She was kind of a little bit of everywhere against Spokane, but I think the game asked that of her, right? Because Spokane really dominated possession and they got Amina Ekage out wide. So it made her playing more of a reserve role. But to your point, I agree. I think a lot of these teams are playing with single pivots and trying to figure it out because they're looking at the big picture. Like, what do we want to be in the middle of the spring season? But right now, that structure still isn't there. I mean, it's only match day 5 headed into match day 6. So it's that balance, right? Trying to figure out your players and what makes them tick And
Yeah.
each game, I feel like we see a little bit of an adjustment to the formations.
Yeah, and to your point, Carolina, I actually thought has adjusted quite well. I think people are starting to target Taylor Porter a bit because, again, they ask her to do a lot. There's a lot of responsibility for her. One of my keys going into that Spokane and Carolina game was, can they rotate around her, right? Can they keep Taylor Porter's job easy so when she feels the need to go out of those central pockets, who then is tucking in? Is it the opposite side winger? Is it DeMarco, right? Is it maybe even an outside back that's cheating just a little bit to hold the space? And I actually thought that from last week to their match against Spokane, I actually thought that they adjusted quite nicely in the rotation around Taylor Porter.
A lot of exciting matches on match day 5. The goals started to come, right, Marion? That's what we wanted to see, and it's finally happening here in the Super League. One of those big goal scorers was Dallas's Allie Thornton. Right after this break, we caught up with her and talked about that match against Lexington. But first, USL Super League on SiriusXM.
Bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.
Welcome back to USL Super League Game Week. We are now joined by the first ever player in Super League history to score a hat trick. It's Allie Thornton from Dallas Trinity. Allie, thanks so much for being here. Congratulations. What a historic win for you guys against Lexington this past week. You guys only had 2 goals, though, going into that match. What did you feel like really finally clicked to get 6 goals?
Yeah, I don't know. I think leading up to that game, our whole mindset was keep on the path that we've been on, right? Because we've been playing well, we've been creating the chances, and it was just keeping the focus on us and focusing on playing good soccer. Like, there was nothing crazy that we had to change. Like, we knew the goals were going to come. It was just a matter of when. So I think the focus was really on, we do what we need to do, keep playing well, keep making the opportunities, and eventually they're just gonna go in. And so yeah, I'm happy they finally did. I think we deserved the win. I think we deserved the goals. So it's good that we had the result to show for it.
Allie, I feel like there's been a lot of adjustments you've probably had to make since coming back home. I mean, you spent, 4 years across Europe? After SMU, 4 years in Europe. And now you're back. Dallas, born and raised. What's been the biggest adjustment since coming back to the States? It didn't even have to be soccer related.
Yeah, it's just funny because I never imagined myself feeling like I would have to reintegrate into American society because I am an American, right? But it's just when I'm in Europe, I'm only back home at summer and Christmas, and that's 3 weeks out of the whole year. And so like you get used to the European style. So then being home long term, it's like, okay, now I have to remember how to drive a car and I have to remember how to handle traffic. And it's just like there are so many things where I'm like, wow, this is not what I remember. Everything's open on Sunday. Really, everything's open all the time. And it's just,
oh my gosh, yeah, I didn't even think like 24/7 drive-thrus. Like that's like not a thing.
Especially in Texas.
Yeah, no drive-thrus in Europe. So I'm like, oh, I forgot convenience is something we all value here. And it's like, oh, cool. I'm glad that I'm back to that.
Wait, and I'm going to go out on a limb and just say there's probably not a Buc-ee's in Europe.
Absolutely not.
Wait, you've been to Buc-ee's since you've been back, right? Like we've made at least one stop at Buc-ee's.
No, I actually haven't.
Allie, okay, so now we have a whole other can of worms. So were you a Buc-ee's fan before going to Europe, or were you just like, no, it's overrated, it's too much? I feel like it's a very polarized.
Well, you would come back for Christmas and everything, so you still had time back in the States.
Right. It just like wasn't enough time because when you're home for only 3 weeks out of the year, the 1 week you're home at Christmas, it is so jam packed of like, I have my family, I kind of have to get all the things that I stock up on in the States. And so there's no real time to really do anything. But going back to the Buc-ee's thing.
Answer the question.
Very important question. I can appreciate the concept of it. The only reason I didn't frequent it more often was because it wasn't close to my house.
I feel like I'm heartbroken. I literally feel like I will plan my road trips to the nearest Buc-ee's. Like if it's in a 30-mile vicinity, I'm like, what's 30 extra minutes? Like let's just step on it a little bit closer to home and like let's go to Buc-ee's. But now my family, they are like, I don't understand. It's a gas station. Like you're not supposed to do that. We are not going to support that. They're like on the opposite side of the spectrum. I will go and spend $150 at Buc-ee's, all of them on the candied nuts.
That is so funny. Yeah. And I can appreciate it. I respect the people who love it. It's just, it was never like in our
Okay.
Okay, but I do know that you are a big coffee drinker, and so are your teammates. So we want to hear, where are you going to in Texas, in the Dallas area? Look, Marion's got her cup of coffee. Where are you going? What are you getting, Allie?
Yeah, I think a big one for us, it's called La La Land.
Yes.
Yeah, super cute. It's like 10 minutes down the street from where we all live. And so, yeah, that's a big one we go to. But we really, as far as orders go, we kind of cover all ends of the spectrum. So I'm more of just like I told you, black cold brew, like nothing special. But then we have like the lavender matcha girls and the vanilla latte girls. And so, yeah, we're really all across the board.
I'm up your alley. Are you a coffee drinker before a game? That's also a polarizing topic. Because like before I call a game, you can ask Anna. I'm showing up. I've got the venti size. Like, doesn't matter if it's one game, doubleheader. We have to have a coffee before.
Yeah, heavily caffeinated going into everything. That's for sure.
What other superstitions or just things you have to do before a match?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know. This is so like way too deep, but I try to not believe in superstitions, because in my mind it's like, oh, you're putting your trust in something out of your control, kind of like, I want the trust to be in me, and so I try to steer clear of the superstitions. But with that being said, I do have like routines. Like I like to get my hair braided before games. Like I do the 2 here. But yeah, there's really nothing where it's like, I have to do this or I feel like I won't play well.
Yeah. No, I've got to ask, because this is front of my mind, because by the time this airs, I will probably be in at SMU, at your alma mater, calling a game there this weekend. Super excited. We're going to be on site. First of all, I need you to text me the Rex. That's number one.
Okay.
Second of all, keep me honest, but Chris Petrucelli was actually your coach at SMU, right?
Yes, he was.
Okay, Chris Petrucelli, obviously the acting head coach right now for you guys. Walk me through how it came to be that, because obviously he spent time in the NWSL. He comes back. He's going to be the one of the general managers of Dallas Trinity. Now he's actually the coach. But I would assume that he was the one that reached out to you?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Talk me through it. What was it like? First conversations?
It was probably around April. I was on the last couple months of my season with Anderlecht. And he had just texted me and was like, super vague, like, hey, I'll have a great opportunity for you to come back and play at home. I think you'll be interested.
Typical Petrucelli. Petrucelli.
Like, all right, well, obviously I need to know more.
Right.
Okay.
And so, we had talked that weekend, and it was probably like an hour and a half conversation. And he just ran me through the whole concept of the league and all of the different teams and kind of his vision for our club specifically. And he told me the other girls he was recruiting and the coaches he was planning on bringing in and the location of the stadiums and, in his mind, like how he pictures the team playing, just everything you could possibly imagine about the league and the team. And for me, I think like subconsciously my mind was made up after that first conversation. But obviously it's like, okay, I'm a player. I need to do my due diligence. Like, let me just see, wait it out, kind of see who else he signs. But I knew from that first phone call I was going to come back. It was just like, it was too good of an offer to pass up.
Right. And before your game against Lexington, Petrucelli talked a lot about the identity of your club, and a lot of it is based on what Dallas is about, being bold, being big, being aggressive. Yeah. But to you, Allie, what does your club identity look like? Because we've seen a lot of that kind of play out on the field the first few weeks.
Yeah, I think it's super cool because, and I'm sure this is the case with a lot of different teams, but obviously I can only speak for Dallas, but we have so many players with such unique backgrounds. Like you have the ones who have never left Texas and like, that's totally cool. But then you have the ones who have played in Sweden, Finland, Costa Rica, Enzi played in an Asian country, and like I've been in Europe, Australia, etc. So it's just, you're bringing together diverse players with such different backgrounds. And I think it just adds such a dynamic style of play because it's like we've experienced the stereotypical American style, right? But then we've experienced all of these different styles as well. And so then to kind of bring that all together on the field, I think you just see like we are very adaptable and very like versatile in what we can do.
If you have a favorite place, this is kind of do with soccer, kind of not. You mentioned it. You guys have been all over the world. Have you ever crossed paths overseas with any of your current teammates?
Um, I'm trying to think. My current teammates, no, but it's like, so Hannah, I was really good friends with one of her good friends, and we played together in France. And then like Hannah Davidson and
Yeah.
Penny, they know a girl who's from Finland who is my goalkeeper at Anderlecht. And so it's not like I haven't played with y'all directly, but the soccer world is so small. It's like whoever you know knows someone else that you know.
That's what we were talking to Jordan about last week. It's like, and I wanted to see if it translated even to overseas. It's like we know the American soccer world, especially the women's game, is so small, whether you play or whether you do what Anna and I do.
Right.
And I was just like, I wonder how small it actually is overseas. Do you have a favorite place that you played overseas?
I was in France for 2.5 seasons and then Belgium for 2. And I just like love France with my whole heart. I think it's an incredible country. Unpopular opinion, I love people. Like, I think the culture is just so charming. And yes, of course, they're aloof and they're distant and they're kind of a-holes, whatever. But it's also like, you just can't help but respect that because you guys are so just chill, go with the flow. Like, I'm not in a real hurry, and I just think like that lifestyle is so, so charming.
It was also really cool to hear you talk about your experience here in the States in college, growing up in the system where it's very physical, the game is, and then you got the technical and tactical aspect of it overseas. How have you combined the two of those within this Dallas Trinity system?
Yeah, and I think in a way we're kind of already doing that simply because we have European coaches.
Yep.
So I think like, we are working hard in the weight room. Like we had fitness testing today. So we are still very much valuing the physical side of things. But then our coaches really put an emphasis on playing. Like we want to pass the ball. We want to keep the ball. We want to press. And we want to of course, we're not going to do it as well as Barcelona, right? No one is. But we do like those little passes that slowly advance you forward.
One day, right? One day.
The capacity, if we have to play the long ball, because that always it has its place.
Yeah, and so much of it is, being able to take what the game gives you, right? And having that duality to your game and not realizing that sometimes it is a direct ball that's in behind, but sometimes it is nice to be able to rest with the ball and progress through the thirds. But I feel like it's been, speaking of being aloof, I feel like one of the things that have been kind of elusive to us is we keep hearing these little sayings from you guys about, right? Like we know what this can be, right? Like we all have this like future goal in mind. And I'm not going to make you answer the 3 to 5 year plan, but for this year, and you can even make it as specific as like this first part of the season, what is like the goal?
Yeah, I think for us, it's like at the end of the day, we really just want to play good soccer, which is so, broad and generic. But I think when you're a brand new team, none of us have really played together. And if we have, it's been 10 years. And so I think right now the emphasis is really on just like that building a really good team chemistry. But then that's not to say we're neglecting actually getting points, because at the end of the day, we want to win the league. And so it's kind of finding the balance of we need to focus on us and we need to focus on building those connections and playing good soccer and learning the players who are on the field with you, but then taking the points when we can get them. So then in the second half of the season, when we've all kind of adjusted a bit more, we still are in a good position in the table to then take the title.
The home points are so important too. And that's what we've really just evaluated from across the league is if you can get your system figured out early, you're going to have that long-term success, especially in the spring league. Allie, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a joy to get to know you. Congratulations on the hat trick and best of luck the rest of the season.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you having me on.
Bringing you up to date on all the action from a busy weekend of women's soccer. This is USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.
Welcome back into USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM. There is going to be some exciting games on match day 6 in Super League, and it's just one half of the Super League on Sunday. The first game is going to be Lexington against Fort Lauderdale at 4 p.m. Eastern time at Lexington Stadium. A little bit of a sigh of relief for Lexington after that absolute demolishing game by Dallas. What do you need to see from Lexington for them to get their season back in order?
Yeah, it's just commitment to the defensive posture. And I use that word posture very carefully because it's not as much about the structure. It's not as much about the balance and who goes when. It's really about the want to, right? The attitude of you as an individual player. And for me, that starts at the top, right? So we always talk about making play predictable. I don't think that their front runners are doing a good enough job of that. I don't think there's enough bite to their midfield right now, but we have to be frank. They're a very young team. We are still very young into this season. And so it's just about knowing, perhaps having the self-awareness that you're not there yet. So how can you keep yourself contained, right? How can you keep the threats contained when you're going up against Fort Lauderdale and you've got the speed of those two wingers that they do in Hamid and Gordon? Take a page out of Carolina's book, deny the supply and make it really difficult for them to get there. So I would look for just a little bit more compactness centrally and a little bit more bite and pressure on the ball.
Little bit of communication too. You look at Lexington's back line, their two center backs are 24 and 22 years old. When you're that young, you're that new to the professional game, you have to be on the same page at all times. The biggest bright spot for Lexington is McGuire and Parsons up top. They were the biggest threats against Dallas's back line last week. But again, players that are 22, 24 years old, needing more professional experience. And that was what Lexington's head coach, Michael Dickey, hammered home against the Dallas game. Next match that we have on Sunday night is at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Oh my God, I just stuttered like crazy. 3, 2, 1. The second match on Sunday is Spokane against DC at 5 p.m. Eastern time at One Spokane Stadium. It's the last match for Spokane at home before they hit the road again, ironically against DC the following week. There has been a huge emphasis through Spokane's offense to find Amina Ekic. It's been semi one-dimensional, just using her on the right side. How can Spokane be a little bit more than just that opportunity and that outlet going out?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting matchup. You mentioned it, a bit too predictable in who they want to get the ball and what she's going to do after she gets the ball. Don't get me wrong. They still were able to create loads of chances. How much quality though, right? We're in some of those chances. And so I would argue if you're going to continue to be one dimensional, fine, I'm with it. Like Amina Ekic hasn't really proven that she can be stopped yet. Have dedication to the runs in the box, right? Yeah. That should be your focus on training. Box organization. You know exactly what she's going to do. I know exactly what she's going to do. If they can't stop it, let her do it, right? But then have dedication to get on the end of the services because she has just been outstanding and she's holding a lot of the responsibility right now. And then for DC, it's kind of the same side or a different side of the same coin, right? They had 20 shots against Fort Lauderdale. They end up losing that game 2-0. Only 5 of their shots were on goal. So there's a huge discrepancy in the shots and shots on goal ratio. We know you're getting into the final third. Again, the quality, the nuances, the timing of the services, the timing of the runs into the box. That, to me, the team that can progress in that area will be the one that comes out on top.
What we saw out of the Spokane game defensively was Cummings and Clark having like a massive miscommunication. You and I were actually on that call. And when Mia Corbin scored, you noted Clark was completely out of the picture of helping Cummings defend Corbin in that moment. So that's a chance for DC to watch that tape and exploit those two center backs. 2 matches in USL Super League this upcoming weekend. You can catch the action on Peacock, and you can catch us every single week on Wednesdays, USL Super League Game Week. For Marion Crowder, I'm Anna Witte. We'll see you next time. Have a great week.
You've been listening to USL Super League Game Week on SiriusXM FC.